Cool. So we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Up first in the agenda is just to talk quickly about uh, what's going on the persistent links above, which I have bookmarked. Can folks see the agenda? Hopefully, good. All right. So I
Yep.
shared the right screen. So the bookmarks are quickly just three, which is the average MRs per month, monthly MRs, monthly merged MRs, and then one on a status around S1, two metrics associated with that. So just to quickly highlight where we are for this week, we closed out March last week, closed out March last week and did pretty solidly. Probably better to look at the community contributions of 1,607. It was 1,606 last week, so I'm not sure what the difference is. And then we're off to a pretty good start for the month of April. We're almost at halfway, 10 days into the month. We have one extra business day in the month, so that kind of helps with it. I have later in the agenda like a kind of an estimate associated with that based on kind of what I've seen so far. The
Do
other
you have theories for why this is so large? This is impressive.
Well, yeah, quite simply, I think we're asking teams to break things up a lot more. We've had a pretty good hiring ramp, which I'll show in a slightly different slide. And because of that, essentially, I think what we're seeing is we're finally seeing the, say, 90 days of startup costs associated with, getting new hires to basically be able to contribute at a reasonable pace. At least that's kind of my rough
I
estimate.
have a different take.
Okay, what's your
Uh,
take?
the seventh just passed, and so a lot was trying to merge in that first week. I mean, that's the same for all of these, but I always feel like the first week you get that big jump. So the question is whether that growth will increase over time.
Yeah, so it won't be one to one to your point. But if we actually look at the monthly MRs, let's see. Hopefully, I get the right length. I get these two confused constantly. So no, that's the same chart. This merge request throughput. This shows you kind of what it is on a weekly basis, which kind of demonstrates, to your point, we do see a drop, and we do see that as well. What's important to note here, though, is that our overall um, and we're still in here. We've gotten the full weekend yet for April 8th. We still got 5 more days left in the week, so it's really hard to use that as a current trend. Otherwise, we look roughly to at least surpass what we did in the second week of March versus the second week in April. So your statement is valid, but the boats are raising is maybe the right way to put it. The trend is still there, but the boats are raising. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. All right, and then the other one that we look at is the average MRs per author per month. This one I like to look at the excluding community contributions, because community contributions could be one author, so that can obviously lower the statistics from that perspective, though it doesn't necessarily cause the trend to change. It just lowers the number associated with it. And this one's much harder to tell because to Clement's point, we could have, say, a portion of the team that's contributing very aggressively in the first week because we're in code complete. And then we could have folks who are maybe, say, getting up to speed and contributing less frequently, who are going to contribute during the month. That'll obviously cause this number to actually adjust associated with this. So one of the things I've asked MEC for is if they can add the actual author counts below this so we can have a better feel for this, because I feel pretty good about 4.6 if the author count was, say, 3/4 to almost full size the author count of March as an example. But we just don't have that data yet to kind of represent that. So it's a little bit harder to tell. Questions on that? Cool. And then the next one is on engineering productivity metrics, adding the 4 engineering productivity metrics. We're about 60% complete on that OKR, which is a pretty good sign from that perspective. We've got monthly throughput, total merged requests. We also have available CSV export, which Clement, I think you and Dennis have used kind of this past week. Has that worked pretty well for you, or do you have any issues with it?
I think it works well. I think I got the right one. I'm not 100% sure. There was a lot of links to download data.
Okay. All right. If you have any challenges, make sure to update this because that kind of represent if we have any problems. And then they started to work on resolution of both P1 and P2 bugs associated with that.
I spoke a little bit with Mike about that yesterday. That's exciting.
Yeah, that'll be definitely an interesting one to kind of look at. Okay, so that covers the persistent links. Getting to the next item on the agenda was to see status on any action items out of the hypothesis. So one is done and not productive. Two is issue 4133. Is that the one you're working on, or Clement, or is that the one that?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one I'm working on. I was going to talk about it later, but I can talk about it now. I'd be like,
Sure, that'd be great.
it's still in progress, but that is the spreadsheet link. So you can open up. There's a few. I'm still trying to do some last sanity checks, and also I noticed that there's some data that's a little bit off. So I'm still not finalized, but at least we have some charts going on with the average number of MRs per engineer. The other tab and this other one with the graph. Right now, I've kind of charted based on all the team members versus all the engineers. So that's another thing that I wanted to check in terms of, are we trying to track like everyone under VP of engineering org, or like development engineering, because that also impacts part of the data.
So far, we haven't seen a difference in trends based on whether we track either one.
Mm-hmm.
I like the development because it's cleaner in regards to the fact that this is kind of the development metrics discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So tracking it from that perspective is probably a bit probably better from that perspective.
Okay, so I'll try to do that because like support engineering probably doesn't do too many merge requests, so that might make this data less accurate. That was my main concern if we ramped up a bunch of support engineers.
Yeah, so that would definitely be kind of my take on it as well, is to go from there, from that perspective. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any challenges, or just kind of a work in progress at this point?
It took a while for me to figure out how to do queries on spreadsheets, but I finally figured it out. But it's interesting, even with this data, there's certain observations that I can make, like certain time when Summit is taking place, or Christmas time, you definitely see a dip in those areas, which is kind of expected.
Okay, cool. All right. Just moving right along. I don't think there's currently anybody working on number 3. Number 4 is kind of in a similar state. We did have supporting data on number 5. I don't know why we haven't resolved that one. There's one in here that I did update. I'm just trying to find it. Thought I put there it is. Okay, so number 4, that's right. Okay, the process of hiring and onboarding engineers makes everyone in development less productive. So essentially I was able to update this chart, and I actually need to get this converted over CSV so I can get it up to date. But we were looking originally at total headcount versus average MRs, and we said maybe there's a negative correlation, so let's graph it based on growth. And I did it first by growth by author, which actually is just, the total number of authors as opposed to the actual headcount in development, which is a little bit different because it can vary. And actually what I saw was it was a lot more noisy, because I think because some months you could have, say, for instance, 20 community authors, and the next month you could have 5. So it's really hard to figure out growth based on that. But what I did find is that, and it's this is where it's kind of what I'm seeing, but I'm not completely sure about it or confident in it, is it appears like, basically in early 2018, we started focusing on hiring, and we saw basically starting to see a ramp. And that's when we see us go from the 15 to 20 range down into the 10 to 15 range, essentially. And then even this point's kind of interesting in regards to, we're at 13 MRs. And if you see, we have a pretty high growth to start off the year, and we start seeing an additional decline in MRs per author from that perspective. So I think it's pretty close. It's not exactly negative correlation, but it is pretty close in correlation, though. I don't know if other people buy that argument at this point or have thoughts.
I would look at it a little bit longer. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's kind of where my head was. It wasn't a step graph, easy, kind of thing from that perspective. So, okay. All right. So we'll put on an agenda for next week to maybe have a couple other folks look at it from that perspective. The other thing is I need to probably clean up the data a little bit relative to that. Cool. So that gets us through the hypothesis section, and then we can go into items associated with this. So it was brought up in office hours. These are the VP office hours that time zone coverage of maintainers in the in the APAC area. So what I'll do is I'll plan to add this to the ticket after the call. Essentially, we have a call open around increasing the number of maintainers as an OKR, and I'll just have to dig that up and basically add that in relative to that. We talked a little bit about this from a prediction perspective, going to the next agenda item. Essentially, we had our largest week as the first week of April, which is a really good sign. Even using trending data associated with that, it feels like we should hit around 1,828, which would be still 200 higher than last month. We actually have one additional business day of development, so that's another aspect of it that kind of plays into it. MRs per engineer is also starting strong, though we don't have an estimate on the number of authors, so because of that, it's a little harder to determine the estimate there. And then Dennis has some additional data on the need for more maintainers. MR review days felt in 1110, which I'll have to make sure to get that also documented. And then the last thing is Clement, you've got the data around hypothesis 2, which we've kind of talked about. Any other topics, or do you have any additional information you want to cover on that last topic?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay, cool. Any other things we need to talk about? All right. It was a light week with everybody being out, but thanks everybody for helping out, and looking forward to seeing some of those results with hypothesis 2.
Before we go, could I ask a quick question? I think this might have been discussed before I joined the company and started attending these calls, but for hypothesis 3, one aspect of that is, people who are in management roles who used to be individual contributors. And do we have some sort of way to extract that data of, when people were promoted from IC to manager role, or was that discussed?
So the one problem with Team YAML is it doesn't have the history, so you don't necessarily know that. The one aspect that we did see was we took the managers out, because we said, oh, well, maybe it's the managers that are causing our trends to go down, essentially associated with it in average MRs per engineer. And when I took out managers, essentially what happened was it lowered the boats, it didn't lower the trend. So it didn't change the trend associated with it. So that is a shortcoming of right now of how kind of we measure this. I don't know how to address it. because we just don't keep history of, like when people are promoted. We don't have that more sophisticated event log from that perspective.
Okay. I was hoping to jump on it, but if it's hard to get that data, then I'm not sure how to move forward with it. Is this something that Bamboo HR might have if I talk to People Ops to
Yeah,
get a
you could
report?
ask Brittany. She might have a way to get that for us, and then if you can have that, then it's probably just trying to figure out how to best populate that, even potentially in the Team YAML from that perspective.
Okay, I'll talk to Brittany, and if it's possible, then I'll update the information here.
Okay.
Cool. Sorry to keep everyone.
No, you're not keeping us. That's all good. Cool. Any other topics? All right. Thanks all.